Protests in Mexico City turned violent.
Cross-border migration is changing their country's capital for the worse.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Mexico is having a record number of tourists this year, and that's great for the economy, but some Mexicans are getting rather fed up with all the visitors who stay for months on end. In particular, Americans who have bought or are renting properties in Mexico so they can work from home while living in paradise. Mexicans say the relatively rich foreigners are driving up prices.
There's a battle for territory in Mexico's capital city, but this is not gang warfare. Since the COVID pandemic, thousands of digital nomads, mostly from the United States, have flooded in, drawn by cheap cost of living, warm weather and a special remote work visa.
Why are you not working remotely from Mexico?
It's affordable, it has good internet and rich culture.
But the surge in remote workers and long-term tourist rentals is squeezing out locals.
Pues el día de hoy estamos luchando contra la gentrificación, es decir, gente que viene de otros países, en su mayoría extranjeros, a querer imponer su cultura, sus precios y desplazar a los mexicanos.
New to the city, working remotely, you're a plague and locals hate you.
Rents in Mexico City are up 51% in 5 years. Long-time residents can no longer afford to live in the neighborhoods they've called home for decades.
I'm here because gentrification is just one more step towards colonization.
On top of colonizing our countries, once again, they're then monetizing their following on social media by showing them how they too can become modern-day colonizers themselves.
Protesters also accuse the newcomers of dismissing local culture and refusing to learn Spanish.
Well, joining us now we have Tizoc Sanchez, one of the protest organizers from the group Aqui Somos, which means Here We Stand. Also joining us is his friend, Rachel Finkelstein, an American who lives in Mexico, and Gabriella Morales Casas, a local reporter. They're all in Mexico City. We also have the former US Navy SEAL and FBI agent, Jonathan GILLIAM. Tizoc, if I could start with you, why the sudden resentment against foreigners?
Okay, I'm sure it can seem as resentment against foreigners, as that was one of the topics that came out in the first march against gentrification. But the main issue has to do with housing and the quality of living standards in Mexico City. Now, there is a side of it which has to do with foreigners, as suddenly digital nomads have more income than many locals, so they have this effect, of displacing the locals from where we used to live.
What other consequences are there of rich foreigners coming into the area?
Okay, perhaps one of the largest consequences, which has to do with culture, and this happens more to the south of Mexico, more to the region of Oaxaca than in Mexico City, but it happens still all across the country. It has to do with foreigners coming and buying local culture, partaking in traditions, in spiritual rituals, and this sort of thing. Kind of out of context, it seems, it can seem a bit disrespectful. And this is what feels like a displacement in the cultural side, not only in the financial and the economic side. So both things come together. But the main thing that is making Mexicans feel hurt has to do with the impossibility to access housing.
Tizoc, just to be clear, your protest movement wasn't violent. You weren't smashing windows, is that correct?
That's correct. When we first called for the march and for the meeting, we didn't call for any sort of smashing windows. That's some other groups that came in later.
Who were those people?
That's a terrific question to ask. I think that there's groups which have an interest in turning things violent and turning things aggressive, because that also disqualifies and makes us, those of us who are protesting and who have been proposing changes, that makes us look bad.
Rachel, you're an American living in Mexico for some 10 years now in the capital. Do you ever feel unwelcome there?
I have found people to be extremely friendly and warm. what happened in the march a couple of months ago was really an anomaly in terms of seeing words that can be seen as hurtful. Generally, people have been extremely welcoming, extremely kind. I've always felt part of the community, especially in Mexico City. And I understand where people's frustration is coming from.
You do?
So some of
What specifically?
absolutely. Some of the frustration that was seen during the marches, as Tizoc mentioned, is tied back to inaccessible housing prices and rising cost of living. And it's not a phenomenon that is unique to Mexico City, although it has been amplified by the increase in folks earning in US dollars, or in some cases euros, coming down. They have a much higher purchasing power. And the history between the US and Mexico is quite complex as well. But the recent influx of foreigners with more resources has understandably shifted the economic landscape and has affected many people's abilities to pay their rent, and they're forced to move further and further away. It's not a completely new phenomenon. Again, it's not specific to Mexico City, but it has increased rapidly in a short period of time, and so the focus has shifted to gringo because it's an easy face to the problem. But we know problems are never that simple, and we know it's not, or I like to think it's not individual responsibility or blame, but rather larger systems that favor certain groups of people over others, those that have access to economic power over those that don't, because it's bringing money in.
Do you ever see your fellow Americans acting in a way that makes you a little ashamed or, I don't know, a little embarrassed?
Honestly, everyone, regardless of where you are or where you're from, there are people that act in not very conscientious or responsible ways. I know Americans have a reputation for being loud or for being disrespectful. I think it really depends on the individual. I have made an effort to learn Spanish. I know a lot of Americans that have made an effort to learn Spanish and others that haven't. So I don't think you can generalize based on where someone is from.
Fair enough. Gabriella, we heard Rachel there. She's seen a couple of signs, for example, kill the gringo or whatever, and it has made her a little uncomfortable in an otherwise very nice experience living in your country. What's your reaction to the marches and the protests we've seen this summer?
Well, my reaction was, honestly, I was laughing at it because everything that happened was focused on the smashing windows, on the sign-outs of Gringo Go Home. And honestly, that just, I don't know, that is not making sense for whatever I'm sure Tizoc and Rachel and the activists want, which is the regulation of housing, the authorities and the officials doing something against the mafia housing, and of course trying to put some order in the rates and the rentals and the cost of living. So the march was not exactly the most the greatest thing that they have done for this gentrification. I believe that it was discrediting of the movement because everything from the news, from the internet, from the columns of the writers was aimed and focused around the smashing windows and things that are not proper because they were restaurants and owned by Mexicans, and Mexican people were inside of it. And even if there were tourists, you don't want that kind of vandalization, which is, I want to say, very different from the Women's March, that they do, some groups do the same. But there, the discourse in March 8 is, I wish I was a monument so people would care about me being violent.
Yeah.
No, because it's that I don't laugh at it. I respect that because we are a country with a very high rate of femicides, and every month 1,000 women are killed just for being women. And I think that makes sense when you see these groups painting monuments. But here, what was the aim? And I agree with Tizoc. That just didn't do anything for the movement.
That's a great
because
point.
it has to be aimed to officials.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Gabriella. And as you say, the others have made it as well, that there are legitimate, ongoing, chronic complaints about housing and affordability and so on. And the people who smashed the place up are not representative, but they are a small group. Jonathan, I know you were in Mexico City about a month ago or so. You made some observations, which, as a former FBI agent, I found quite interesting about the agitators, the rioters, the troublemakers, if you like, as they've been called in the media. What did you notice about them?
Well, first of all, Matthew, I was all over Mexico. I spent some time in Mexico City, but was all over the country, and north and south. So I was able to see how and where the country has changed dramatically over the years. Because as I said before, I've been there over the past 20 years, numerous times with clients doing protection work. So I was in there amongst people and amongst the different groups or societies that or cultures that exist within Mexico over a broad period of time. And what I've seen in Mexico City as of recently, it's very intriguing listening to your other guests speak. One thing about Mexico City in general is that it has grown over the past 10 years dramatically when it comes to industrial and businesses coming in there and building their businesses there. And with that comes people that are being paid quite well by these different companies, which in turn raises the price of housing. So it is a cost and effect. Mexico government welcomes the business comes in. It does
but specifically your observations about the types of people who were turning to violence and shouting out rather obscene logos. What did you notice about them?
So what's interesting about that is when I was down there and the people that I talked to that were Mexican, that were working in Mexico City and around, they were happy. They don't like the fact that cost is higher, but they've become a very accepting culture. However, the timing of the people that were involved with these protests that were breaking things, what I saw was that it took on a political movement beyond the homes and started focusing more on the hatred of Americans, or Americans need to get out. And it was timed perfectly with what was happening inside the United States that had to do with immigration and locking down the border and pushing people that are here illegally out. So it appeared to me, looking at it from both sides, that those people that were breaking things and that were rioting basically are the same groups that were doing it here, and basically was to disrupt any type of movement that President Trump and, for that nature, the president of Mexico, that they're doing to better their countries and make things progress.
Well, the president
that is politics. That is politics mixing with actual people who have a real need, which is the housing issue.
Could be. I mean, Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's president, actually described some of those actions on the streets and language as xenophobic. Tizoc?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, as a Mexican, it makes no sense to me to wake up every day and wonder, will I find a gringo I can kick on the street today? As a Mexican, I do wake up and I wonder, will I be able to own housing anytime soon? So I do agree this is a place of violence, and these groups have more to do with politics, right? And more with creating this sense of instability, and more with making it hard for us who are in the organization and activism to engage in an honest, straightforward dialogue with the government to solve these issues. So I do agree with that part. And these acts were violent, but as Gabriella was saying, they were the smallest part. If you look at most of the graffiti or messages that were left after the march, they are mostly not about gringos. They are mostly about housing. They are mostly about income. They are mostly about labor. So that's my take on this whole issue of the violence in the march.
Tizoc, I have another question for you. The pressure from rich foreigners, but there's also pressure now from migrants, undocumented migrants who are trying to get into the United States. They've been shut down by the Trump administration. Some of them have been able to go home. Many are trapped inside of Mexico. Can we just look at this very short report, and then I'll pick up with a question to you.
They come from an estimated 177 countries, places like Venezuela, Guatemala, Honduras, Ecuador, Haiti, and even further away, including Russia, China, and Afghanistan. They almost always paid the Mexican cartels to get them into the United States, but that pretty much all ended when Trump came to office in January. And so now an estimated 270,000 migrants are stuck behind the wall wondering what to do. Some can't go back to their country of origin. China has previously frustrated efforts by refusing to issue travel documents. And others are going back to places like Venezuela, risking the return journey through the Darien Gap, a place you don't want to see once, let alone twice. Hundreds have died there.
Before we go back to the panel, let's just listen now to a Mexican anti-narcotics cop who fights the cartels. He covered his face during our interview to protect his identity. He told us that these migrants who are trapped in Mexico are now causing some issues for the local people.
En el tráfico o en el tránsito, mejor dicho, de personas que se han quedado, que ellos vienen de otros países y vienen, ahora sí que se podría decir, en circulación, ¿verdad? Hacia aquí, hacia Estados Unidos. Entonces, al momento de bajar esa cifra, estas personas optan por quedarse en territorio mexicano. Entonces a nosotros nos ha representado la estadía de esas personas que muchas veces incurren en delitos. Pues de alguna otra manera ellos están en desacuerdo que estas personas se queden aquí, ya que representa pérdidas de empleos, pérdidas de incluso hasta de casas, porque estas personas están invadiendo casas, terrenos, para alojarse ahí. Entonces eso a estas personas, a los locales de aquí, les representa un problema.
Back to Tizoc now. So Tizoc, we've heard there from that very brave young policeman from Mexico. He said that the migrants who are trapped in his country, your country, are now putting pressure on local services and a small minority actually committing crime. What has been your observation?
Sure. Okay, so that has changed since the United States closed their borders or made it harder to pass. Mexican authorities reported they received 140,000 asylum requests last year, and the number has been growing. But as it comes to this question relating immigration and crime, right? To me, the issue really is vulnerability. Like most immigrants and asylum seekers are people like you and me. And if we suddenly arrive to a different country which already has a well-established organized crime, could we really outsmart them out of the blue? That's not the kind of person we are. So to me, the problem is their vulnerability. Where do they live? These immigrants, where do they live? We know wealthy Mexicans and digital nomads live in downtown Mexico City, and then Mexicans who are doing well enough live in a first layer, but then come the poorest Mexicans who cannot even dream of owning property, and these immigrants who cannot even dream of having a proper job. So yeah, perhaps there's a small minority who are engaging in this, but to me, the real issues, they are exposed to being both victims or even being recruited by the organized crime. So to me, the real issues have to do with pre-existing organized crime and pre-existing inequality, because this guy says they are putting pressure on services, which may be true, but that also means services in the periphery of Mexico City are not great. That's the reason, for example, gentrification happens in the central core of Mexico City, because that's where services are better suited. So I would mostly think about pre-existing conditions such as crime and inequality, and then immigrants just add a new layer of complexity to this problem.
Gabriella, what should the government do about these people who are now trapped in Mexico?
Well, I think that the government should give them asylum and, of course, try to get them back to their countries if there is a possibility for it. But I have this heartbroken thing because every time I think in Central American immigrants in Mexico, and then I think in the Mexicans in the middle country or the migrants to the United States, I believe it's the same thing. It's the same issue that we are all facing. Where does the human beings stop being human to become aliens and just being pointed out as criminals just because of their precedents? And I don't think that's fair. I have seen in the streets here in Mexico a lot of these migrants asking for money, asking for food, and they are no harming anyone. But of course, as in any country, and as Rachel said, well, we have all kinds of people coming to our borders, and not only to the United States. And the possibilities of working in Mexico are not good enough for them, anyways. So, and I don't think they could find any better life in the United States either. I think they should stay here. I think they could find something if the government, if the officials get them some official work. So, I mean, like a social living community. The problem with Mexico in all levels is that the social fabric is very broken amongst Mexicans. Imagine with other people, with foreigners, call it Hondureños from Honduras or Central America, or gringos. It's like we don't know. We are not very used to have migration. That is not a common thing in Mexico. We're not used to that, but we are not the kind of people that reject foreigners or reject migration. So I believe the government should help them. That's my input.
That's an interesting point, a perspective, if you like, Mexican perspective. Jonathan Gilliam, do you have any advice for Mexico about how to be humane but also process people so that they still have control and an understanding of what's going on?
Sure. I think, early on when this mass migration happened across Mexico, it is important to understand that many of these individuals are not financially able to move at the speed at which they did, clothed, fed, and with water on their own. These people were fed, clothed, they were given transportation and financial stability so that they could move in mass numbers across Mexico and other nations into the United States. I think it would behoove Mexico to identify who those groups were that paid for those people to be there and get stuck. Because ultimately, yes, the people wanted to come to the United States because there was many handouts that were being offered that were known and publicized, that the government of the United States said, you come here and we're going to do this regardless. And people started moving. But they are the impoverished nature of many of these people. They would not have been able to get to the border of the United States had they not had the assistance of these groups. If those groups are rich enough to get them there, then those groups are rich enough to get them back. And I think the Mexican government should hold those individuals, those groups accountable and help those people get back out of Mexico. It wasn't the United States government that brought them there, and in large part, it wasn't the Mexican government. It was private entities that funded that movement of those people. Anyone who's traveled across Mexico or Central South America will tell you those people did not have the money to move across that region as fast with that many people as they did. It was an organized movement. And I would say one other thing. This thing about housing in Mexico and the costs going up because of businesses coming in, that's happened all over the world. It's happened in the United States. Even people who make a good living can barely afford a house now inside the United States. That is a leadership problem that is around the world in all these different places. And it is a problem of greed in society where, big businesses want to make more money and they pay their specific workers more money without thinking about either one, the politicians or the business leaders. They're not concerned with the displacement of people who just live there. And that is an issue, I think, that many people around the world need to start contemplating, because if you want to fix that problem, these world leaders and these businesses have to be held to a standard. And that is, I think, a big problem, is that they focus clearly on a leader in the world, the United States, or this president there or here, but they don't focus on the businesses themselves, the mayors, the local leaders who allow these things to occur because they're making money out of it. And I think ultimately it's the same in every situation. The people that suffer are the people who just wake up every day, grew up, live in that area, and they end up being displaced because of the business and the wealth and the politics.
Jonathan GILLIAM and Gabriella Morales Casas, Rachel Finkelstein and Tizoc Sanchez, thank you all so much for your contributions today. Really appreciate that. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.